Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Mike France, the CEO, founder, presidente of a little brand called
General Bottle Washer of Christopher Ward.
Yes.
Thank you, Andrew.
And today, in our first ever comprehensive interview with Christopher Ward, we are going to tell the story of this extraordinary brand in 5 watches.
Okay.
Now,
we'll try.
Mike's slight look of incomprehension is
No, that's not incomprehension. That's total apprehension.
Apprehension, exactly.
I'm terrified.
It's because I've watched countless interviews with Mr. Mike France, and I've loved them all because the man brings a direct and very different tone to a discussion, because there's openness, there's transparency, there's numbers, there's margins, all the things you don't hear.
Okay.
But what's been lacking for me is a comprehensive telling of this story that we can center on what people love the most, which is watches in hand. We're going to have watches to tell our story. I don't know if you've arranged them in order, but what you will learn in this video is how Christopher Ward went from a sort of second season career that was almost like, I don't know, you can put it in your words, but you could have retired from life at that point.
Yes. After we sold, Peter and I sold a business called Early Learning Centre, which many of your audience will be aware of. And the ill-gotten gains from that sale could have led to many a sandy beach. It did for a short while, but I absolutely believe we're here to be productive. And so after a month, what are we going to do next? So no idea that in 20 years later, I'd be talking to you in your new, what do we call this place?
It's a watch discovery studio.
In the watch discovery studio. Not in the least bit pretentious, Andrew.
It's so flowery, but it truly, I
it's
hope
fantastic.
There are customers in it right now.
Fantastic. I walked in and I have to say, immediately, and I've opened a lot of retail outlets in my career. And when you walk into a place, you either get an immediate sense that something has been done well and right, and no bull. When I walked in here, as I said to your team, it was obvious that something had been got right. So congratulations, sir.
Thank you.
It's a great addition to the landscape of watches in the UK and particularly in London, and I thank you for it.
I'd like to get stuck into this because we have 5 watches to tell the story. What is the first watch that tells the first chapter of Christopher Ward?
Well, the first chapter is the first watch, which was...
You've got one.
This is a prototype. This is a pre-production prototype of our very first watch, the C5 Malvern Automatic. This is what started us off. Those who are familiar with certain brands will notice there is a sort of a nod to a Portofino about it, if I'm perfectly honest. I was at the time really into IWC, still am actually, but I just love the pared down aesthetic, no nonsense, this was to some extent inspired by the Portofino. We literally knew nothing about how we would create a watch. The people who designed it with us were the people who their last job had been designing the sides of our wagons at Early Learning Centre, a design studio at the time called Easy Tiger. They've now become known as the One-Off, and they don't get out of bed for less than $1 million. We gave them their very first job. This was a very early job, and the designs were created by the design team. Adam Devey-Smith, who owns the business, he left his previous business, set up Easy Tiger. He'd moved about 10 designers into his house. Would you believe, in a place called Melbourne in Derbyshire? There's some serendipity going on here.
There's Melbourne in Florida, there's a Melbourne in Australia, there's one in Derbyshire.
So this was designed in Melbourne, but Derbyshire rather than Australia. And literally the designers that helped us design this watch were working out of his conservatory at the back of the house.
Right.
Not long after this, very sad news, his wife got so sick of designers and us traipsing around the house, they divorced. But that's
mental note. Don't start a design agency at home.
So we worked on this together, and as I say, with certain inspirations, and it launched on June the 2nd, 2005.
Yes.
Slow trickle in our from our new website. We had advertised in the independent newspaper. It's got an ETA 28242 inside it, Swiss made. By the way, this was when we were all made. This was assembled in China. So what you'll notice, it says Swiss movement on it rather than Swiss made.
Yes.
And one of the first discoveries we made was that we could actually access these things. This was when the Swatch Group was still shipping Swiss-made ETAs over to China. Around 2007, they stopped that practice, which led us to a divergence. We either go Myota and carry on making in China, or we go, actually, we think Swiss-made is still important in the psyche of the watch public. Right, we're going to have to go to Switzerland. So
I feel that story is coming.
Yeah.
Can I stay here for a moment?
Yes, by all means.
As torturous as it is for me, I am picturing you on a beach. And
that's fairly torturous for anybody, to be
in a pair of
honest.
budgie smugglers, which is cruel of my mind.
That's a very Australian thing.
It is. But how did we go? Because there's a missing piece here. We have a watch here. What was the price proposition back then?
This would have been £149.
£149 with an ETA 2824. What led to you deciding that the life of leisure was not for you? You're on the beach.
Yep.
And what did you think you'd bring to the watch industry that didn't already exist to get to this?
Ooh,
That's what I need for watch one, piece one.
Good question. Part of the discovery was that we could access the same componentry that many of the much more famous brands than we were certainly then and still are today could access. And but then we learned that when we did our research and did our work and our marketing plan, we learned that the markups that some of these brands were applying, given that we had access very early on to first cost. Not many people have access to first cost. So what we learned was that actually you could get hold of all of this stuff. You could get a great movement. I mean, not that we at that stage really understood what a great movement might be. We were guided there to the ETA by the guys we worked with. We said, well, what sort of movement should we have? And they said, oh, well, you need a good workhorse movement that's reliable, that's easy to service. The only one really that you need to look at, ETA 28242. Right, okay, can we get that? Yes, we can. So these guys gave us a background of information that we really wouldn't have had, which led us to discover that some brands were marking up by 34 times.
Wow.
Everybody talks about us having a direct-to-consumer model, DTC, which is absolutely true. And the big difference with us is we went online, DTC. Frankly, companies like Marks and Spencer, probably quite well known, have always been direct-to-customer. They've always they've designed and manufactured their own product and sold it through their own retail stores at about a ×3 multiple. That was the world I was brought up in. That was the world Peter was brought up in. Yeah. So it seemed the natural thing to us to decide to go with a 3 times multiple. But when we realized we could also access the same quality, because the key thing is you're trying to deliver that value without compromising quality.
Yes.
And that was what we discovered it was possible to do.
Because as I hold this watch, and I want you to hold it and tell me, what do you feel and what does this make you feel as an object? Because I look at this as a watch on its merits, and it's really quite well made.
It's not bad.
Finished.
It's not bad. I mean, it's I mean, there's some. We'd be quite critical now. We would be quite critical now of things like the case design is a little bit slab side, a bit simplistic, but actually beautifully finished. We discovered some really good a good case manufacturer, not anywhere near as good as the case manufacturer we use now, but not a jungle factory either. So the case is well made. We went for applied indexes. I'm not even sure we knew what an applied index was at the time, if I'm perfectly honest. We've gone for an inserted sunray aspect to the dial. It's a 2824, a wonderful movement that stood the test of time. So whenever I look at this these days, I'm thinking, we weren't, considering we knew nothing, we ended up.
Surely it's not a shameful or embarrassing.
No. And for the time, we're talking 20 years ago, there was nothing else like this anywhere, at anything like the sort of price point. And it's a Tasmanian, name of Dave Malone.
This is the best part of the story. As an Aussie comes in. And
so Dave Malone, whom we've now named one of our showrooms after in our new offices, because we owe him a real debt of gratitude. Dave, I think somebody had sent him a copy of the independent newspaper ad that we'd taken out to promote this watch. We'd always been keen to market what we were doing, because you need to drive people to a website. They're not just wandering past on a high street anymore. He was at the time a major poster on timezone.com, still around, but in those days it was about the only, Time+Tide didn't exist, nobody existed. This was, these were the early days of social media. Nobody had even coined the phrase social media when this was going on. We didn't even know timezone.com existed, literally. Dave, a friend of Dave's, we understand, sent him the ad and said, does this make any sense to you, Dave? He went, no. I'll expose these guys because they're charlatans. So
his issue was that there couldn't be a watch with a 28242 at this price.
No, exactly.
Simply
he knew
impossible.
There was nobody else within anywhere near striking distance. So he bought a watch from us. We shipped it out.
Yeah.
Great. We are marketing geniuses. We're now selling in Tasmania. Little did we know. And,
he's sharpening the tools.
And to our eternal benefit and to his eternal credit, frankly, when he got it, he opened it up. He realized there are certain markings on a movement that tell you whether it was Swiss made, whether it was a genuine ETA. He recognized those markings. Looked at the quality of the rest of the watch, the applied indexes, the dial, the case, the level of polishing, the fact that we put a deployant clasp on, and he wrote this amazing sort of post, a copy of which now dresses the wall in our new office.
Tasmanians dare to dream. You can change the world.
He was not a Tasmanian devil. He was a Tasmanian angel.
I just love it.
So, and that really was the start of our journey.
I've got a fun thing we can add to this as we go through these watches. Let's talk about the revenue for Christopher Ward at the point of each watch, because I'm sure you remember. Do you mind giving me ballpark on that?
Sure.
Where are we at with this watch launching? What are we talking?
Well, bear in mind this launched day one, so revenue 0.
Yeah. It's a round number.
By the end of the first 6 months, I can't remember what the actual turnover was in the December, but I knew that when I did the projections, it looked like the annual turnover would be 400k sterling, yeah? And that was the point at which I realized, actually, there's something going on here.
It's a lot of units.
And so the projection said, first full 12 months, looks like 400k. Actually, it turned out to be absolutely spot on. We took about 410k in the first year.
What's next, Mike?
Well,
what a start.
The next one is our first Trident, and I've put it in here because, in a way, this represents us making sense, starting to make sense of the watch industry, because you've got to remember, we landed in the watch industry, made a couple of watches, didn't know anything really about it, began to learn about watches, started going into the rabbit hole that we all know only too well. We'd gone to Baselworld in 2005, first Baselworld, before we'd launched our first watch. You were just hit with thousands and thousands and thousands of watches.
We've got some good B-roll for that, don't we, Marcus? It's dizzying.
It's dizzying.
And the scale of it,
it's unbelievable.
It's hard to explain.
So you're like, what does this all mean then? And it was about the third Baselworld, 2007, that we began to understand, or we thought we began to understand, the structure of the industry and how you would structure a collection. And what became much clearer after a couple of years of walking around Baselworld was that the Rolex Submariner was a rather influential watch.
That British dry wit, rather.
It was rather influential, and that virtually half the brands there,
every brand had a version of it.
And now, and you've said this, and most people will say this, but without the sub, I don't think we'd be stood here today. The watch industry is built on about half a dozen iconic watches, several of which are Rolex, the biggest one of which is the Submariner. So we recognize that actually, if we were going to go to the next level in turnover and recognition, then we probably had to have our version of the Submariner, which is the Trident. I have to say, far too much of a homage than we would do now. But we've always been quite open about where our influences have come from. Most people pretend that they are not influenced by X, Y, and Z, but and I know there are so many versions of the Submariner in existence. And I remember now, Daniel Kurt, who works in our supply chain in Bel, he came back to us after spending sort of 10 years away. At the time, he was working for Synergy Horological. And he and I remember us actually designing this watch together, and he's an expert. He'd worked for Omega. And this was our first, I think, really grown-up approach to watches, but more importantly, it was our beginning to understand the structure of the industry. And this transformed our business. As soon as this went on sale.
So talk to me, 2004, we're talking 400K. 2007, where are we at? Before and after the Trident? In
total turnover terms, probably before the Trident, we're probably at around 1.2 million. After the Trident, we're at 3.
Wow.
So it completely transformed the business. And got us a lot of recognition. To this day, I'm very proud of things like the.
Talk through because God is in the details.
The name I came up with, it just seemed appropriate. And one of the details that we still have today is the counterbalance. The counterweight on the second hand became a Trident. It's an aluminium bezel. We moved on to, I think back in 2007, we were sort of taking design references, obviously, from the sub. The teardrop hour hand, we moved on from that a long time ago, but it seemed important to the time. Still, we've got plenty of customers who would like us to go back to it. We were into laser etching, not deep stamping. So these sort of things which we were really proud of at the time, we look at now and go, ooh, what were you thinking of? But back then, when there weren't thousands of alternatives, it caused quite a stir. And I'm very proud of this watch, but most importantly, it's a sign of us learning. We came into this industry knowing nothing. I think one of the key things you have to do, whatever you do, you'll be the same as this. It's how do you make the complex simple? How do you make sense of what is a very crowded marketplace? There are today 550 watch brands alone in Switzerland. That's just Switzerland. How do you make sense of all of this? And it was only this watch that began to point that we were beginning to make sense of the industry.
For many, many years, when the name came up, Christopher Ward, I just thought it was a homage brand.
Yep, I can understand that.
That doesn't insult you at all?
No, not at all. I think it's a valid comment. Neither Chris nor I nor Fraser, who were essentially the people designing the watches. We weren't watch designers. We were new to the industry. We were trying to make sense of it. We had to make a living. We had to make turn a profit. We had to get cash in. We had to survive. There are very, very few watch designs that are commercially successful that don't have their roots in about half a dozen watches.
We'll get to that in a little bit later.
That doesn't have a root in it.
Let's move on to number 3.
But this is a really important moment for the brand, because this is the C9 jumping hour. There was a guy, a watchmaker, called Johannes Janker. Now, Johannes was a very young East German at the time. I think he was 27. Had been working for people like Languezon. And he ultimately developed 4 modules that sit on top of proprietary movements. And not only did he want to create a jumping hour movement, he wanted to create the most accurate jumping hour the world had ever known. And I don't know today whether that's still true, because we haven't checked all of the jumping hours to note whether it is true. But you will know, and we certainly did our research at the time, nearly all of the jumping hours, we're not talking thousands of jumping hours, it's a relatively small marketplace. Even the very, very, very expensive ones were just jumping ahead or just after the hour. And he was determined that it would jump absolutely on the hour, and he did it. Many people think that the Bel Canto is the first time we moved into sort of A, more expensive, and B, more challenging complications. This was 2010.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, this was 2010. And what you're holding in your hand is a one-off, because we did it in stainless steel. We did I think it was a 100-piece limited edition. It was around about, for us at the time, a high price point of about £1,295, £1,300. We sold out of the steel quite quickly. And we thought,
people are coming with us.
Yeah, coming with us, but how can we expand that? So let's do a gold plate version.
Yeah.
We announced it as we always did at the time. We talked to the forum, who were growing and very much involved with our brand. We said, we're going to bring out a gold plate. No, what? You're selling out. You told us the steel was going to be a one-off. We said, but it is in its steel.
Yeah.
So actually we decided, no, we won't pursue the gold, because that will upset our core followers. So this is the only example in the world of this particular watch. And my builder has offered me many times the price of this watch if he can have it, but nobody's going to get it other than me. Because I'm a firm believer that if you're really going to execute over time and be around for a long time in this industry, aesthetics will get you so far, but you have to be involved in the engineering watches and deeply understand the expertise and have the expertise within your grasp, that you're able to ultimately produce pieces that are a combination of the aesthetic and the engineering, because that is the art and science of watchmaking.
So we're 400, 1.2
to 3.
1.2 to 3, and then
2010, not long after that, we're probably at about 4 beforehand, 5 afterwards.
Okay.
We funded the next watch we'll look at, which is another major step forward for us, and being involved in design, which Johannes created for us, which was the Caliber SH21, which was our own in-house movement. In many ways, preceding that, we'd been at Baselworld 2014, and one of the finest moments in my career, certainly, and one of the funniest moments in my career, was when we were walking around Baselworld. It's interesting how Baselworld continues to play a role. Jorg had the movement in his pocket, the then CEO of Breitling, walking down one of the aisles. Hi, Jorg. I've got something to show you. Jorg won't mind me saying he's not a man who can keep a secret for very long. So he pulls the movement out of his pocket, shows it to the then CEO of Breitling, who retorts, "What gives you the license to do that?"
Right.
Which for me, we give ourselves the license to do that, but it completely validated what we've been trying to do, which was do something different to the industry. And at that moment, I knew that we were probably going to have a different lift off again. And although the movement is still with us, and we're about to, we're working on the next stage of it. This movement, which is a 5-day power reserve chronometer, driven from 2 barrels, in sequence, COSC certified. Everyone to this point has been COSC certified. Since that point, at the end of 2014, the most reliable and robust movement of all of those we have in our canon is that.
How did the in-house movement impact on your revenue?
Not greatly. Because it, to be honest,
I imagine it probably took away your profitability.
Yeah, I mean, the was not a cheap movement to produce. It was at a higher price point, therefore, than we'd had. So
How much was this watch at the time?
that would have been selling at about 1,500, 1,750. So a bit of a step. And I think the design, although that we pared back the design, one of the things that people don't necessarily understand about this movement is Johannes was, for him, this is a English-inspired movement, although the 7750, which as we know is one of the most robust workhorses that's ever been created, and I think everybody in watches is a huge fan of the 7750, and so many things have come off that. So we wanted something that was going to, and he wanted to design something that was going to be as reliable and robust as that, and as I've said, he delivered. He also felt that he wanted it to have an English aesthetic, which we talked about, yeah? And so historically, the French are the ones who got fancy with watches, yeah? Breguet, etc., Guilloche, all of this was very French aesthetic. The British, if you go back and look at Tom Peony, look, very simple, very straightforward, no flurries anywhere, just very solid. Actually, it's very difficult to get a very, very straightforward finish. Yeah, more expensive than
Côte de Genève and
all of
Anglage,
that, because they're covering up all sorts of blemishes.
I see.
Yeah. So when you look to have a simple, straightforward finish, then your metal has to be absolutely perfect. And one of the reasons that all of those flourishes exist today is because it covered up a multitude of sins. It wasn't just about, yeah?
Interesting, because what I see here is I just see some really heavy satin brushing.
Satin brushing.
Yeah.
And we had a big argument about this, Johannes and I. He won in the end. I gave in because he wanted it to have this. He wanted the nod to the English historical past of watchmaking and watch finishing. I was saying to him, I'm not sure people will understand it. They'll expect to see Côte de Genève. They'll think we've cheapened it. And of course, people assumed that we were taking cost out by finishing in this way. It actually added cost.
That's a good thing to go back in history and say, just in case you were wondering.
Yeah. So it had some disadvantages.
No countersinks to the screws, and that would have added cost, I imagine.
Yeah. It was an interesting attempt. To achieve it, to have a commercially viable in-house movement for a brand of our size at the time was
crazy.
Ridiculous.
Now, one of the things that inspires me about Mike France and about this brand is this concept for the brand and for all of its collections that is inspired by the automotive industry. Now, excuse me, I'm going to show that I've done a little bit of research here, but I want to bring people in on this, because what we have here is a BMW 1 Series. And what you'll notice here is that we had a watch at $149 in 2005 and a watch now at $17. So we're talking about, more than 10x the price. And yet customers are coming with you, market share is growing, customers are being retained and they're growing with the brand. What this is proof of, ladies and gentlemen, is this incredible and very counterintuitive strategy from Mike and his team, which is that you can, once you have a customer come into a 1 Series, you can grow them within the brand up to ad infinitum. And we're seeing now that even getting to the Bel Cantos of this world, customers are saying, give me more complicated watches, and they're not seeking to jump into a Breguet after having a Bel Canto, or jump into a Fel&Mari Secular Perpetual, which is even more expensive than this. They're staying with you. So I just want to call out the fact that you're probably watching saying the business logic in this is squirrely, because you started in this price point and within less than 10 years, you're 10x the price point. How are you not shedding customers along the way? Have I summed up the theory right?
Beautifully, and probably better than I could. We again making more and more sense over the course of the first decade of the industry itself. We also realised that most of the brands in watches are owned by groups. 80% are owned by groups. Of course, all groups, all luxury groups, it's certainly in watches, position brands and ask them to stay in their lane. Yeah.
That's right. It's a mosaic approach.
It's a mosaic approach. We saw that and said, well, actually, why do we need to stay in our lane? So what we want to become and still want to be is entry level, accessible at all aspects of watchmaking.
Yes.
And you do that carefully, and you go into new areas carefully and over time. You don't try and do it all in one go. But over the course of the 20 years, we have learned that it is possible to push out as long as you're not changing your economic model. Everything we do is still 3 times. As long as you're retaining that, there will be no compromise on quality, which we definitely do not do. It allows us to have moved into some of the products that we've more recently gone into. So and that's no different in a sense to the automotive model. You know, Mercedes, BMW, there's a thread of quality, of workmanship, of design that runs through everything. But an X1 is not the same price as an X8. And that's the model that we have looked to and tried to develop. And
now we change gears to keep going with the automotive analogy. Why is this watch on the table? Because this is your last shot.
I know, and I suppose the team went, well, why aren't you showing a Bel Canto? I said, well, to be honest, this was for me an example of the brand really having grown up. 2015, a young watch designer named Adrian Buchman sends me an email. Could he have a chat? He'd heard about our brand. He was moving from Switzerland to the UK. He'd like to consider us to employ him. Adrian came in, again in his 20s. It was one of those sort of really key moments when suddenly we had in our midst, because one conversation, I knew we had to have this guy in the business. We suddenly had, in my humble opinion, at the time in our midst, one of the most talented watch designers, never mind his age, watch designers in the world of watches. And suddenly he was going to work for us. Here we have an incredibly talented designer. And instinctively, he felt that the one area at that time that was not really being given the attention by the watch industry that it should have was case design. Because everybody, and still today I have to say, they've gone slab-sided. Robots are polishing. Yeah? The reason for slab-sidedness is it's cheaper. Robots are polishing. Yeah? So they can't polish fine facets. So he started designing cases which had more facets on them. And we termed it the light catch case ultimately, because what it's trying to do is to attract attention, because you're getting play of light. And often the best watches in our experience, in my experience, are those that give you the sort of feedback that you don't necessarily expect to get, whether it's in sunlight, in artificial light. The dial is the most obvious place for that, but also the case is a really important place for it as well, even though it's not as visible. So we went through an incredibly complex piece of work to determine what did we need to do to bring something fresh, new to our own Trident collection, but to the marketplace. In May of 2019, we launched the new Trident collection onto the world. This came a bit later, but it's the same design, ceramic bezel. This one is an interesting one because it's for our one. We're pretty proud to be donating 2% of our sales to charity, and one of the key charities that we support is the Blue Marine Foundation. So we created this watch from our new collection. Dive watch is obviously appropriate. With the new Trident, and all of the proceeds went to the Blue Marine Foundation. It sold out very, very quickly. But it's an example of the design aesthetic beginning to be owned by Christopher Ward.
I see the evolution from basically a Portofino through to something that, how many weeks ago, Marcus, we're in New York, we're at the Wind Up Fair we get to Christopher Ward, and Zach and I have challenged each other to find a diver, a dress watch, what was it? I can't remember, chronograph, all the categories, go anywhere, do anywhere watch. And Zach chooses the Trident with the blocky loom.
I
think it was titanium.
The Lumiere.
And the Lumiere. And the comments, you guys just couldn't get enough of this watch. You already knew about the Trident. And I feel that I'm glad you ended on this point, because this still continues to resonate very much in terms of Zach gravitating to what would be an iconic Christopher Ward model. I think we can say that now without too much.
So.
I think it's in the dive category, it's just recognizable. And the fans came out in force for that. So you've nearly a decade ago, I suppose, started to nail down some identity.
15, we started to really begin to create the Christopher Ward signature.
Yeah. Where do we end up with revenue in 2015? Because this is still a decade ago.
This was released in 2019. So we're talking probably circa 12, something of that ilk by this time.
So we've gone from 400k to 12 million pounds, and then, if I can be so bold, I know the figures from last year.
Yeah.
We're going from 12 in 2019 to 30.
Yeah.
Is that right? In 2024,
just over 30
2023.
million,
And we have an unrecognizable trio to the first five. What do you see when you see them next to each other? Do you feel that, I mean, we are talking about a 5-year gap between 2019 and what we have now, but what the hell happened?
I'll tell you one thing that happened. COVID happened.
Yes.
And I was talking to somebody earlier this week about, I'm not sure necessarily we'd have got to the Bel Canto without COVID. We were locked down, we were able to focus and concentrate. But what had happened over the course of this journey to 2019 and into 2020 is we'd become an established business. The brand was seen in a very different way. You're kind enough to say you recognize a handwriting. That's what we aim to do. The quality was, outstanding for the pricing, no compromise on quality. And the confidence and ability of the team themselves was rising all the time. And when you are confident, not arrogant, but confident, then you're able to believe that you can push boundaries even further. This, again, is the roots of it are in this watch, because the module that is caliber FS01, Frank Stelzer, who is named after Frank Stelzer, who is the heir to Johannes, was his watchmaker's apprentice. In fact, was involved in the creation of this. Johannes went on to become the technical director at Solita, still in touch with Johannes. But Frank, again, an amazing watch engineer. His bath time moment, at some point was, I think, by the addition of merely 60 additional parts, I can go from a jumping hour module to a Sonnerio Passage. Really? Back to, that's in his head to begin with. He's worked that out in his head. I could be around for a long time.
I don't think about that stuff in the bath.
No, I don't. I don't think about that stuff. I don't want to know what you think about it in the bath either. Thank you very much, Andrew.
We're all set.
I really don't. But he envisaged the possibility of a Sonnerio Passage. This is the latest evocation, which is the classic with the guilloche finish and this different time-telling dial. And I think, we knew we had a good watch on our hands, but there are maybe just those few occasions in your life, and I'm sure you've had them as well. I know I've had maybe 4 or 5, 6 maximum in my entire career, where suddenly something has its own momentum, where the challenge is to hang on to the tiger's tail. And this hit, the original hit, and it just exploded. And that, again...
And we're now talking £3,500. So
yeah.
This is by far the highest price point for the brand.
When you've got talented people, and we are very fortunate to have some very talented people, sometimes you just need to give them the space and the permission to go and do some stuff. And they did some stuff. And,
Here we are. You talked about those moments where the ambition suddenly just kicks up several notches and they come to you, your team come to you with a watch like this, which just even aesthetically is just, yes, this is a similar base and there's 60 components more in this than this in order to create a charming watch. But just looking at them, was there not a little bit of fear in your mind? Was there not a feeling of overextension? Did you think this could possibly be, this could tank and dramatically impact the business? Did that enter your mind at all?
No, if I'm honest, I didn't think it would tank.
Okay.
I didn't think it would tank. I didn't expect it to sell thousands. I didn't think it would tank. There was a long process of iteration and lots of battles. Every time we decided we wanted a bridge somewhere else, that created a real problem for Frank, because you have to re-engineer the module. So it was a tortuous birth, but great fun. And I don't think it could have happened outside of lockdown, because we had nothing else to do. Once you've seen the last of Succession, there was nothing else to do of an evening but work on this. Yep. So the level of conversation and detail that we were going into was quite intense. Probably the biggest decision we took was taking any logo off the dial, so
especially for a crowning achievement in some ways.
And that was that was an interesting conversation. We have many prototypes with all sorts of different variations, but we felt that the beauty of this watch spoke for itself. And who knows, if we really understood the elixir of creating things that always create that sort of spike, then you and I would be back to lying on a beach somewhere. Nobody would ever. For
5 minutes before you went and started with some other.
But I defy anybody to absolutely predict what happened with this watch, and certainly I didn't predict it.
It's easy to sit here now and with this in hand and say, well, of course it was going to change the game. But I find I'm surprised. And again, this is testament, and we'll finish on this point, because I feel that this really shows the possibility of what is to come. And looking at the comments on some recent content you've done, they're just hungry to go with you to the next level, as opposed to, they don't just get the Bel Canto and then go and buy a Langer or a Glashütte Original or a Jacques Dro or something with an open dial and small time-telling dials and complications, that they're staying with you within, for example, to continue the BMW family. So how much freedom do you feel knowing now that people are going to cross these bridges that might have seemed too far? They're going to go with you.
Freedom is an interesting word. I think we feel some responsibility as well. We have to be careful. None of us take any of this for granted. I can't, on my wrist at the moment underneath.
Oh, don't do that, Mike.
Is something very special, which the PR guys didn't want me to wear really, but let's have a quick look. So,
okay. Yep.
There you go. Can't show you.
This is unfair, man.
It's about moving.
Lost our audience.
It's about moving things forward, and beyond this, even this, we have something that I think will move us even further forward. So I think there's a responsibility, there's a confidence, a growing confidence, but we don't take it for granted. And you've got to remain really hungry if you're going to keep moving things forward. And honestly, there's an energy in the business that is tangible.
Yeah.
And these are good people doing good things, very talented people. And I back them to keep producing things that surprise and delight. Yeah. And that's really, surprise and delight is, I suppose, the catchword of what Chris Ward is trying to be all about.
Well, Mr. France, that was the interview that I wanted to exist, that doesn't exist currently. That was absolutely,
thank you, Andrew,
comprehensive and surprising and delightful, because I did not expect that selection, and I've learned a lot today. Thank you very much for watching Time+Tide. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't before, and we will see you on the next video. Thank you, Mike.
Cheers.